he will be here with us. I'm talking about Professor Graham Hughes. He's the head of the London Lupus Center, London Bridge Hospital. He was the chair of the third International Congress of SLE in London in 1992. And his topic will be the antiphospholipid syndrome in the 2050. Welcome, Professor Graham Hughes.
This is Graham Hughes speaking from London, and I'd like to thank the organisers for allowing me to present at this distance for the conference. It was 30 years ago that we described the antiphospholipid syndrome in clinical detail, and our first papers were in the British Medical Journal and Lancet in 1983. But a couple of years later, our first paper across the Atlantic was in the International Lupus Conference in Canada. And I'd like to pay tribute to my two colleagues, Dr. Nigel Harris and the late genius, Dr. Aziz Garabi, who between them really were the brains behind the setting up of antiphospholipid testing. It also gives me the chance to pay tribute to Martin Fritzler, who I'm sure has been mentioned already in this opening ceremony, but he was the inspiration behind the series of international lupus conferences at which we first presented our data on antiphospholipid syndrome. That is published in the Journal of Rheumatology, and it also gives me the chance to pay my own homage to Duncan Gordon, the late Duncan Gordon, who, after the journal was set up by Metro Brislow, for so many years built up this superb international rheumatology journal, the Journal of Rheumatology. And finally, in my pictures of honour, I'd like to show Dr. Mulford Kamashka, who is my colleague over many years at St Thomas's Hospital, and who really, with me, set up the London Lupus International Conference, which many of you attended, and for which I am so grateful to Mulford. So, what are the predictions for 2050? It's not that far ahead, but I'm going to make some fairly strong predictions, and well, we'll see. The first is that, of course, it will be the first intergalactic conference on APS, and it will be held in the Disney Conference Center on the Moon. So start booking your tickets now with Virgin Atlantic to get your place in this meeting. What are the predictions? Number one, antiphospholipid testing will become worldwide, not just confined to major hospitals, but it'll be available to general practitioners, surgeons, and lay people. And over-the-counter kits will be available, and the kits will be simplified, will be a single test for antiphospholipid family of antibodies, and will do away with the horrible lupus anticoagulant test. What about the clinical features? First of all, I think there will be new hope for migraine sufferers. For me, migraine is number one, or maybe number two, feature of the antiphospholipid syndrome. Almost invariably a history of migraine as a teenager, often going away but coming back in their 20s and 30s, and often familial, interestingly. Migraine is the major disease worldwide, and the cost is huge. This is 7 years ago, an estimate from the States of $17 billion spent annually on this disease. I have thought for a long time that antiphospholipid syndrome is a major link with migraine in general. And a few weeks ago in Nature, a major paper appeared on a large series of migraine patients linking migraine statistically with stroke. Of course, they did not mention it, that they didn't measure antiphospholipid antibodies. But my prediction is APS will be the major missing link between migraine and stroke. My next prediction is stillbirth, late pregnancy loss. And this was in the London Times several weeks ago, the stillbirth scandal. Every day as many as 3 babies are still born who could have lived. It's time for the NHS to adopt new policies and a new attitude. And we know now that 1 in 5 cases of stillbirth, the mother is ABL positive. And this is from large series, including the very recent collaborative studies from my doctor and colleagues here in the United States. Testing more frequently in early pregnancy, and my hobby horse is test after 1, certainly at the moment after 2 miscarriages, not the dreaded 3 miscarriages. And in that way we might avert what the Times describe as the greatest tragedy that can befall a family, that of late pregnancy loss. Stillbirths will be cut by 50%. Cardiovascular. What about the predictions for the cardiovascular system? Well, a recent paper not so long ago, Greco, showed that antiphospholipid positivity was present in 40% of their cases of acute coronaries. And there are a number of papers now appearing linking coronary disease, including other features of cardiac disease, with antiphospholipid antibodies. Therefore, my prediction is that young heart attacks will be reduced, especially in women, and there will, of course, be protection against stroke. There will be testing in early TIAs, and certainly in young people with abnormal neurologic features. I think that in addition, the antibody will be involved much more and reflected in the accelerated atherosclerosis seen in many diseases such as lupus. And the prediction here is that antiphospholipid syndrome, a crossroads of autoimmunity and atherosclerosis, as defined by Yehuda Schoenfeld in this paper, will become recognized widely, and antiphospholipid antibodies will become recognized as the major cause of accelerated heart disease in lupus. What about lupus? One of the major problems of antiphospholipid syndrome in lupus and in primary APS is memory loss. It's now becoming widely recognized, and for me, it may be the #1 feature of the antiphospholipid syndrome. By testing more widely, I'm sure that some cases of memory loss will be treatable. Not some, but many. And this slide from our unit some years ago shows the very dramatic effect of a short trial of heparin. We used 10,000 units of low molecular weight heparin. The improvement in this case of memory scale, word finding, from 13th percentile to 84th. And we see this more and more. This morning I saw a patient who has now been 5 years on low molecular weight heparin. She couldn't tolerate warfarin and found heparin very much better. And she has been free of what she calls brain fog and doing extremely well. I should add that she's married to a hematologist. And finally, what about the rest of lupus? I think the antiphospholipid syndrome has had a major impact on SLE. Certainly it's now recognized as probably the major cause of chronic disease or chronic damage in SLE. But in renal biopsy, I'd like to pay tribute to Mary Carmen Amigo's work in looking at the microthrombotic lesions of SLE. And this has really revolutionized our thinking in lupus nephritis, and the interpretations of lupus biopsy. So, in summary, I'd like to thank Mary Carmen Amigo, Bernardo Ponzestel, and the organizing committee for allowing me to take part, at least from a distance, in this meeting. I'd like to wish you a very successful lupus conference. Thank you very much.